We're going to talk a bit now about understanding the problems related to a project. A condominial project is more than just an engineering drawing. We're very used to thinking of a project as something where we sit at a table, make a drawing, and then send the topography team out to the field. And many projects, especially sewage network projects, are actually done entirely in the office, where people take the topographical data, conduct all the studies, soil surveys, topography. In other words, I study everything, all the technical aspects are analyzed, but I haven't studied, checked, or evaluated the resident situation, the current state of the sewage situation in the home. Because you have to consider that if people are living there, they must have found some solution themselves to solve their sewage problem. Either they discharge it onto the street, build a septic tank, or set up a small network at the back of the house and release it into the stream, into the stormwater, something like that. They have done something. So the design of the condominium system differs from the conventional approach because it is fundamentally based on understanding the local reality. So it is an engineering project, but one that is closely linked to knowledge of the area and an understanding of the residents' reality. Therefore, in the initial phase of a condominium project, you start with an office-based study, gathering information based on urban planning and the data you have available. But in the next stage of the project, the first thing you do is ask, is this project design ready? So we take the project out into the field and do what we call a field survey. And what exactly is this field survey? I will walk through every street, all the streets in that area, to try to determine whether the design I created in the office is actually suitable for that city. In other words, whether it is feasible to implement. So I will check if the network I planned for this street, can it actually be installed here? For example, here we want to run a line along the sidewalk. We don't want the line in the middle of the street, but we need to check, right? Is it possible to run it along the sidewalk? Is the sidewalk wide enough? Can I actually build a network here? So we go through the streets to check on these issues, to see if what I planned is actually feasible. In some situations you check and this network that's on this street here, this street is very busy. It's the main street of the city. My project isn't affected if I move the network from this street to another street here, one that's not as busy or hasn't been paved yet. So I keep checking these aspects and make adjustments to the project I designed in the office to better fit the reality I see out in the field. At the same time, for this project, we have to walk down the street, moving along the street, and we need to start imagining how the condominium line, the layout of which hasn't been defined yet, and will only be discussed and decided on during the community mobilization process, can connect to this network that I've just defined, which I refer to as the public network, which would only be the main part of the project. This is the network that will collect wastewater from the condominial branches, which will connect to all of the households, and bring it to the pumping station or the sewage treatment plant. So when I think about how these branches will connect to this network, I am trying to figure out how I will collect the sewage from each resident's house and bring it to this main network. We think of the condominial branch as a kind of secondary network. It connects to this primary network I mentioned, and we are walking through the streets to check its route. So at this stage of planning how the condominial branches will connect, we need to keep in mind that the main function of the condominial branch is to collect sewage from each resident and make a connection to the public network. At this point, I need to enter some homes so I can understand the specific situation of each house. How did you solve the sewage issue in your home? Then the resident might say, I built a small pipe here and discharged my sewage into the stream. Another might say, we discharged the sewage into the stormwater system, or we are currently discharging the sewage onto the street. So as we leave this area, we try to identify the critical points we found, what are the areas with the most severe sanitation issues, which areas are fully paved, and which areas would have the greatest urgency for implementing a sewage system. This way, we start mapping the city in a way that allows us to characterize it so that when we leave, we know exactly, for example, the networks we designed here, we need to make a 30% or 40% change to this layout. And I already come back from the field proposing changes. This network that runs along this street, I'm going to cut this network and reroute it through the other street. And in addition, we have to decide on the layout. Many times we work with a situation where we have topography, contour lines, and so on, but when we get to the field, it doesn't match up, it's not exactly accurate. So all of these adjustments will be made during the field work. Things that weren't previously recorded, like channels or ditches created by residents. So we define and map all of this as we go. In this way, we truly characterize the city during the field visit. This field visit is indispensable. The mapping we do in the field is much more important than that initial study, that preliminary study, the initial system layout we did back in the office. And we leave with a completely different understanding. We walked through this city and found that part of it can only be served with a connection at the back of the lot. Or not. Look, we walked around and found that everything is fine. We don't have any loss that slope toward the back. We can see that all the connections can be built along the sidewalk. So when we leave there, we still don't have the design for the condominial line, which, as I mentioned before, will only be developed during the community mobilization process. But I leave there knowing exactly what the plan will be, the proposal for the future, roughly how they will solve the sanitation problem for each of the condominiums. I will know, for example, that we have identified a number of housing complexes where there is a ditch running behind the lot and where residents have built a small makeshift network. And we have to remember that if a resident has built a temporary network, it's because they have already figured out what the best sanitation solution is for that situation. So the foundation of everything is to remember that we are out there in the field to solve the residents' problem, to address the issue of how they will connect to the sewage system. So imagine you arrive at a housing complex and all the residents have already built a small network running behind their lots. And then I go back to the field and propose to install a network along the sidewalk. But wait, if they have already come up with a solution, if they have already built a small network running behind their lot, how can I propose a network that goes along the sidewalk? And then I have to consider that by proposing this network along the sidewalk, I am asking all the residents to break through the floor of their entire house, dig a trench, and make the connection to the front. So I need to consult the residents. Are they actually going to do that? Or am I going to build a line in the sidewalk and no one will ever make the connection? So that's what the condominial system is about. It's an engineering proposal, but with community participation, where I offer a solution, but it's a solution that has been discussed, shared, and accepted by the residents. So it's an engineering proposal with a social foundation. So it is this process that will result in the construction of a system that you can ensure will meet the residents' needs. On one hand, I am guaranteeing service is possible, and on the other hand, I am guaranteeing that they will connect. Because if I build a network and that network technically serves the residents, everyone is able to connect. And even more importantly, the residents took part in the discussion. They participated throughout the entire process and they agreed that they will make the connection in their front yard or on the sidewalk at the back of the lot. In other words, it was a shared solution. So technically the residents are able to connect to the system, and also the residents have committed to connecting to the system. They have promised that they will make the connection. I have two important things. On one hand, service provision, and on the other, agreement. This is the main proposal of a condominial project. It is a project discussed with the community and planned and detailed together with them to propose the best solution for the sewage in that region.